The afternoon sun beat down on Fort Henderson's main administrative building as Captain Maya Torres stepped through the heavy glass doors. Her tan uniform was crisp, her boots polished to a mirror shine, but the weight she carried had nothing to do with her gear. After 12 years of service, most of it spent in places she could never fully discuss, Maya had returned to where it all began. The waiting room outside Colonel Phillips' office was filled with junior officers, most of them young men fresh from their first deployments. They sat in chairs along the wall, chatting casually about football scores and weekend plans. When Maya entered, the conversation didn't stop. They barely glanced at her. She took a seat near the window and pulled out her phone, pretending to read emails while she listened to their chatter. One of them, a lieutenant with sandy hair and an overconfident smile, was holding court. "I'm telling you, they're lowering standards left and right," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "My buddy at recruitment says they're desperate to hit their diversity numbers. Half these people wouldn't have made it through basic 10 years ago." Another officer chuckled. "Yeah, I heard about some captain who got a combat medal for basically doing paperwork in the green zone. Participation trophy generation, man." Maya's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes on her phone. She'd heard it all before. In different countries, different bases, different wars. The assumptions never changed. "Lieutenant Morrison," a sergeant appeared in the doorway. "Colonel Phillips will see you now." The sandy-haired lieutenant stood, straightening his uniform with exaggerated precision. As he passed Maya, he gave her a quick, dismissive look, the kind reserved for people he considered beneath notice. One by one, the officers were called in. Maya waited. She'd grown good at waiting. Patient observation had kept her alive more times than she could count. Finally, after nearly an hour, the sergeant returned. "Captain Torres." Maya stood and followed him down the hallway. Colonel Phillips was new to Fort Henderson, transferred in just 3 months ago. They'd never met, though his reputation preceded him, a by-the-book administrator who'd spent most of his career at Pentagon desks. The office was exactly what she expected: neat, impersonal. The colonel sat behind an oversized desk, reading from a folder without looking up. "Captain Torres," he said, his tone flat. "You're here about the training officer position." "Yes, sir." He finally raised his eyes, giving her a quick once-over that felt more like an appraisal at a used car lot than a professional assessment. "I've reviewed your file. It's impressive on paper." Maya caught the pause, the subtle emphasis. On paper, as if her service record was somehow fictional. "However," Phillips continued, leaning back in his chair, "I'll be frank with you, Captain. Fort Henderson's training program is critically important. We're preparing soldiers for real combat situations. I need someone with substantial field experience, not just," he glanced at the file again, "support operations." Support operations. Maya felt the familiar sting of blood rushing to her face, but years of discipline kept her expression neutral. "Sir, my record includes 4 combat deployments." "Yes, yes," he interrupted, waving a hand dismissively. "I'm sure you performed your assigned duties admirably, but this position requires someone who's been in the thick of it, someone these young men will respect." Young men, he didn't even try to hide it. Maya took a slow breath. "With respect, sir, my experience speaks for itself." Philip smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure it does. Tell you what, we have a tactical review meeting tomorrow morning, 800 hours. The staff will be discussing some new training protocols we're implementing. Why don't you sit in, observe how we do things here, and we'll take it from there." It wasn't a question. It was a dismissal dressed up as an opportunity. "Yes, sir," Maya said. As she turned to leave, Phillips added, "Oh, and Captain, this is a professional environment. I expect everyone to earn their place through demonstrated competence, not through other means." Maya stopped at the door, her hand on the frame. She could feel his eyes on her back, waiting to see if she'd react, if she'd prove whatever point he'd already decided about her. She looked back over her shoulder, her voice steady. "That's all I've ever asked for, sir. A fair chance to show what I can do." The smile on Philip's face said he didn't believe she could do much at all. Maya arrived at the tactical review meeting 15 minutes early. The conference room was on the second floor, with windows overlooking the parade grounds where young recruits were running morning drills. She poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot in the corner and took a seat near the back of the room. Officers began filing in, most of them clutching their own coffee cups and manila folders. She recognized Lieutenant Morrison from the waiting room yesterday. He slid into a chair near the front, laughing at something another officer whispered to him. Colonel Phillips entered last, followed by his executive officer, Major Chen, a stern-faced man who looked like he'd been carved from granite. Phillips moved to the head of the table and spread out several maps. "Gentlemen," he began, then seemed to remember Maya's presence and Captain Tor's. "Thank you for being here. We're implementing a new close-quarters combat training protocol, and I want everyone's input." For the next 30 minutes, Maya listened as the officers discussed various scenarios. Some of the suggestions were solid, based on current battlefield realities. Others were outdated, drawn from textbook exercises that had little relation to modern warfare. When Lieutenant Morrison spoke up, Maya had to grip her coffee cup to keep from reacting. "Sir, I think we should focus more on traditional strength-based conditioning," Morrison said. "The physical standards are there for a reason. If someone can't handle the load, they shouldn't be in combat positions." Several officers nodded in agreement. Phillips looked thoughtful. "Valid point, Lieutenant. Captain Torres, you've been quiet. Do you have any thoughts on the physical training component?" Every head turned toward her. Maya could feel the skepticism radiating from the group like heat from a furnace. This was a test, and they expected her to fail it. She set down her coffee cup. "The scenarios you've outlined are good foundation work, but they're missing some critical elements based on current theater operations." Morrison smirked, such as the fact that close-quarters combat in urban environments isn't about raw strength. It's about speed, adaptability, and understanding civilian patterns. In my experience, the soldiers who survived weren't always the biggest or strongest. They were the smartest and the fastest. "Your experience," Morrison repeated, his tone dripping with doubt. "Which deployments were those exactly?" Maya met his eyes. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics of my assignments, Lieutenant. They're classified." A ripple of barely suppressed laughter ran through the room. Morrison leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "How convenient." "Lieutenant," Major Chen's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He was staring at Morrison with an expression that could freeze water. "That's enough." But Phillips held up a hand. "No, it's a fair question. Captain, if you can't share details about your service, how can we trust your recommendations?" Maya felt the trap closing. If she stayed silent, they'd assume she had nothing to offer. If she defended herself, she'd sound desperate. "Sir," she said carefully, "I understand your concern. What I can tell you is that I've trained alongside some of the best special operations soldiers in the military. The tactics they use prioritize intelligence and precision over brute force. That's what I'm suggesting we incorporate here." Morrison snorted. "Trained alongside, so you watch from the sidelines." "That's not what I said." "But it's what you meant, isn't it?" Morrison pressed. "Look, I'm sure you're good at whatever it is you did, logistics, coordination, whatever, but tactical training for combat soldiers, that requires someone who's actually been there." Maya's fingers tightened on her coffee cup. She could feel her pulse in her temples, the old familiar anger rising. But she'd learned long ago that anger in these situations only proved their point. "I have been there," she said quietly. Phillips shuffled his papers. "I think we're getting off track. Captain Torres, thank you for your input. We'll take it under advisement." The meeting continued, but Maya barely heard the rest of it. She was being frozen out. Her suggestions ignored or dismissed with polite nods that meant nothing. When Phillips finally adjourned, the officers filed out in groups, still talking and laughing. Maya gathered her things slowly, waiting until the room was nearly empty. Major Chen remained, reviewing notes at the far end of the table. He looked up as she moved toward the door. "Captain Torres," he said, his voice low, "a word." She stopped, wary. Chen stood and walked closer, his expression unreadable. "I want you to know," he said, "that not everyone in this room shares Colonel Phillips' perspective." Maya studied him, trying to read between the lines. "Sir, I did some research after your file crossed my desk," Chen continued. "There are gaps in your service record, long ones, the kind of gaps that usually mean something significant." Her heart began to beat faster. "I can't." "I know you can't discuss it," Chen interrupted. "I'm not asking you to, I'm just saying. I recognize the pattern, and I think you're getting a raw deal here." It was the first moment of kindness she'd experienced since arriving at Fort Henderson. Maya felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen, just slightly. "Thank you, sir." Chen nodded. "Don't thank me yet. Colonel Phillips has already made up his mind about the training position. He's giving it to Lieutenant Morrison." The words hit like a physical blow. The lieutenant who just disrespected me in front of the entire staff. "The same one." Chen's expression darkened. "Phillips thinks Morrison represents the right image for the program. His words, not mine." Maya felt the familiar weight settling back onto her shoulders. "So that's it. I came back for nothing." "I didn't say that." Chen glanced toward the door, then back to her. "There's a joint training exercise next month. SEALs, Rangers, regular Army, big event. Lots of brass coming through. If someone were to demonstrate their capabilities in a very public way, it might change some minds." "You're suggesting I make a scene." "I'm suggesting you make them see you." Chen picked up his folder. "Colonel Reeves from Naval Special Warfare Command will be here. He's old school, but he respects competence above all else. If you can get his attention, his opinion carries weight. Even Phillips won't ignore him." Before Maya could respond, Chen was already walking toward the door. He paused at the threshold and looked back. "The SEALs arrive next week for advance prep. I'd suggest you find a way to be visible." Then he was gone, leaving Maya alone in the empty conference room. Her mind racing, Maya spent the next week doing her assigned duties, reviewing training materials, observing exercises, and enduring the barely concealed disdain of her fellow officers. Lieutenant Morrison had been officially announced as the new head of tactical training, and he wore his victory like a crown. She saw him around the base, always surrounded by other junior officers, always loud, always confident. Once, in the mess hall, she overheard him telling a story about a bar fight he'd broken up in Texas, embellishing it with heroic details that seemed to grow with each retelling. Maya kept her head down and waited. Major Chen had said the SEALs were coming, and she needed to be ready. On Monday morning, a convoy of dark SUVs rolled through Fort Henderson's main gate. Maya watched from her office window as they parked near the Special Operations Liaison building. Men in casual civilian clothes emerged, moving with the unmistakable economy of motion that marked elite operators. Even out of uniform, they carried themselves differently. Aware, alert, dangerous. By afternoon, word had spread through the base. The SEALs were here, and they'd be running live training scenarios starting Thursday. Maya made her decision. She would volunteer to be part of the support staff for the exercises. It wasn't glamorous, but it would put her in proximity to Colonel Reeves and his team. It was a chance, however small. She found Major Chen in his office that evening. "I want to volunteer for the Joint Exercise Support Team," she said. Chen looked up from his computer, one eyebrow raised. "That's mostly logistics work, running supplies, coordinating schedules. You'll be invisible." That's fine, I just need to be there. Something like approval flickered in Chen's eyes. All right, I'll add your name to the roster. The next 3 days were a blur of preparation. Maya coordinated equipment deliveries, double-checked range safety protocols, and made herself useful in a dozen small ways. She saw the SEAL team in passing, hard-faced men who spoke in low voices and seemed to communicate as much with glances as with words. Colonel Reeves was easy to spot. He was older than the others, maybe late 50s, with gray hair cropped military short and eyes that missed nothing. He walked the training grounds like he owned them, inspecting every detail with the kind of attention that came from decades of experience. On Thursday morning, the exercises began. The scenario was a hostage rescue in an urban environment, a mock village the Army had built on the far edge of the base. 2 teams of regular infantry would attempt the rescue while the SEALs observed and provided feedback. Maya was stationed at the command post, tracking communications and updating the tactical display as units reported in. It was background work, the kind that went unnoticed when done right and got blamed when anything went wrong. She was logging a status update when she heard Lieutenant Morrison's voice outside the command post trailer. Complete waste of time, he was saying. My guys could handle this scenario blindfolded, but we have to sit here and let the special operations prima donnas show off. Maya glanced through the window. Morrison was talking to a small group of officers, his back to the command post. He didn't realize she could hear him. The SEALs have their place, another officer said, but Morrison's right. The basic scenario hasn't changed in years. We know this stuff. Exactly, Morrison said. But try telling that to Phillips. He's so busy kissing up to the brass that he can't see we're babysitting here. Maya turned back to her display, trying to focus on the exercise. On the monitors, she could see the first team moving through the mock village, approaching the target building. Their formation was solid, their movements coordinated. Then she saw it, something the team hadn't noticed. On the rooftop of an adjacent building, one of the opposing force members had taken a position with a training rifle. From that angle, he had a clear shot at the team's entry point. Maya keyed her radio. Command to Team 1, you have an elevated threat northwest position, approximately 30 meters from your entry point. There was a pause, then the team leader's voice crackled back. Copy that command, we see him. The team adjusted, sending 2 members to clear the roof while the others held position. The exercise continued smoothly. In the observation area, Colonel Reeves was watching the displays with his arms crossed. Maya saw him nod slightly, acknowledging the good call. The scenario ran for another 2 hours. Maya spotted 3 more tactical issues before they became problems, quietly feeding information to the teams on the ground. It was subtle work, the kind that helped operations succeed without drawing attention to itself. When the exercise ended, the participants gathered for the after-action review. Colonel Reeves stood at the front, his weathered face unreadable. Overall, he said, solid performance. Good adaptability, good communication. Team leaders, you responded well to intel from command. Whoever was running communications deserves credit for those early warnings. Major Chen, standing near the back, caught Maya's eye and gave a slight nod. Lieutenant Morrison stepped forward. Sir, I believe that was Captain Torres handling comms. Reeves looked around. Torres, you hear? Maya's stomach tightened. She hadn't wanted the spotlight, not like this, but she stood from where she'd been sitting along the side wall. Yes, sir. Reeves studied her for a long moment. Good work, Captain. Those were smart catches. Thank you, sir. Morrison's smile was sharp. Captain Torres is very good at support roles, watching from a safe distance, spotting the obvious. The room went quiet. Several officers shifted uncomfortably. Even in a group setting, Morrison's tone crossed a line. Maya kept her voice level. The team on the ground did the real work, Lieutenant. I just provided information." "Of course," Morrison said. "That's what you do, right? Provide information from the rear, while others take the actual risks." Colonel Reeves' expression hardened. "Lieutenant, that's enough." But Morrison seemed to have an audience now, and he couldn't help himself. "I'm sorry, sir, but I think it's important we're honest about experience levels. Captain Torres has a lot of theoretical knowledge, but theory isn't the same as real combat. And when we're training soldiers who will face real enemies, they need instructors who have actually been there." Maya felt the familiar anger building, but this time something else came with it, a cold, clear certainty. She'd spent years being underestimated, years biting her tongue, years letting her work speak for itself, and it had gotten her nowhere. She looked directly at Morrison, her voice steady and loud enough for everyone to hear. "You want to question my experience, Lieutenant? Fine. Go ask your general who I am." The room went silent. Morrison's smirk widened. "My general. General Hawthorne at Special Operations Command. Ask him about Black Viper." The change in the room was immediate. Several of the SEAL team members straightened, their casual postures suddenly alert. One of them, a senior chief with a scar across his jaw, took a step closer, his eyes locked on Maya. Colonel Reeves' expression shifted from irritation to something else. Recognition, maybe, or surprise. Morrison, oblivious to the change, laughed. "Black Viper? What is that, some kind of call sign? Did you pick that yourself?" But Reeves was no longer looking at Morrison. He was staring at Maya, his eyes narrowed. "Senior Chief," he said quietly, not taking his eyes off her, "get General Hawthorne's office on the line, now." The room remained frozen as the senior chief pulled out his phone and stepped into the hallway. Maya could feel every eye on her, but she kept her gaze on Colonel Reeves. His expression had shifted from skepticism to intense focus, the look of a man rapidly recalculating everything he thought he knew. Lieutenant Morrison's smirk had faded, replaced by confusion. "Sir, what's—" "Quiet," Reeves said, his voice like steel. The weight felt eternal. Maya's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her breathing steady, her posture relaxed. She'd made her move. There was no taking it back now. The senior chief returned, phone in hand. "Sir, I have General Hawthorne's aide, Colonel Marcus. He's standing by." Reeves took the phone. "Colonel Marcus, this is Colonel Reeves, Naval Special Warfare. I have a situation here. I need confirmation on a call sign Black Viper. I have an officer here claiming that designation." "Yes, sir. Captain Maya Torres." "Yes, that's correct." The silence stretched as Reeves listened. Maya watched his face carefully. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did, a flash of what might have been respect or possibly awe. "Understood, sir. Thank you." Reeves handed the phone back to the senior chief. He looked around the room at the assembled officers, then back to Maya. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight it hadn't before. "Captain Torres, my apologies. I wasn't aware of your actual service record." Morrison stepped forward, still not understanding. "Sir, I don't— What's going on?" Reeves turned to him slowly. "What's going on, Lieutenant, is that you've spent the last week insulting one of the most decorated special operations officers in the United States military." The color drained from Morrison's face. "Black Viper," Reeves continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "is the call sign for a joint task force operative who spent 8 years embedded in some of the most dangerous counterterrorism operations this country has ever conducted. Those gaps in Captain Torres' service record, those were years spent hunting high-value targets in places you've never heard of, doing things she can never talk about." Maya remained silent, her expression neutral, but inside she felt something breaking loose. Years of silence, years of being dismissed, finally cracking open. Reeves walked closer to her. "Colonel Marcus tells me you were recommended for the Medal of Honor twice. Both recommendations were classified and buried, because acknowledging them would have compromised ongoing operations. Sir, Maya started, but Reeves held up a hand. He also tells me you saved 17 American lives during an extraction operation in Syria, that you spent 3 months recovering from injuries you sustained holding a defensive position until evac arrived, and that every SEAL team commander who ever worked with you requested you for their next mission. The room was absolutely silent now. Morrison looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "How many combat deployments did you say you had, Lieutenant Morrison?" Reeves asked, his tone casual but cutting. "2, sir," Morrison managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "2," Reeves repeated. "Captain Torres has 8. 8 deployments, most of which involved direct action missions that make your experiences look like summer camp, and you question her qualifications." I didn't know, sir." "No, you didn't know, because you didn't bother to find out. You saw a female officer and made assumptions." Reeves shook his head. "That kind of thinking gets people killed, Lieutenant." Major Chen stepped forward from the back of the room. "Colonel Reeves, if I may, Captain Torres was being considered for our tactical training officer position. Colonel Phillips decided to give it to Lieutenant Morrison instead." Reeves' eyebrows rose. "Is that so? And where is Colonel Phillips now?" "In his office, sir," Chen replied. "Shall I get him?" "Yes, and tell him I need to speak with him immediately. This conversation is far from over." As Chen left, Reeves turned back to Maya. "Captain Torres, I owe you an apology. When I first saw you working comms, I thought you were just another competent staff officer. I should have looked deeper." "You had no reason to, sir," Maya said. "My record is classified. Most people can't access it." "Most people would ask questions before making judgments," Reeves countered. He glanced at Morrison, who still stood frozen in place. "Some people don't have that sense." One of the younger SEAL operators, a lieutenant with sharp eyes, spoke up. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, Syria, 2019. Were you part of the operation that took down the Al-Qahr cell?" Maya hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I was there." "Holy hell," the lieutenant breathed. "We studied that operation at training. The tactical breakdown was insane. 3 operators holding off 50 hostiles for 6 hours. We were told one of the operators was wounded and still managed to." He trailed off, realization dawning on his face. "That was you." "I had help," Maya said quietly. 2 incredible SEALs who didn't make it home. They deserve the credit, not me." The room's atmosphere had completely transformed. The officers who had dismissed her were now looking at her with a mixture of shame and awe. Morrison had backed away to the wall, his earlier confidence completely shattered. The door opened and Colonel Phillips entered, looking irritated. "Colonel Reeves, I was told you needed to see me urgently. I'm quite busy with—" He stopped when he saw Maya standing at the front of the room, surrounded by the SEAL team. "Colonel Phillips," Reeves said, his voice cold, "we need to discuss your personnel decisions. Specifically, your decision to pass over Captain Torres for the training officer position." Phillips' face flushed. "That's an internal matter for Fort Henderson, Colonel. With all due respect, it's not your concern." "It became my concern when I learned you gave the position to a junior officer with minimal combat experience, instead of one of the most qualified tactical operators in the Army." "I made my decision based on what's best for this base," Phillips said stiffly. "Captain Torres' record, what I could see of it, didn't indicate the kind of hands-on combat leadership we need." "What you could see of it," Reeves repeated. "Did you attempt to get clearance to see the classified portions?" Phillips hesitated. "The classified portions are classified for a reason. I worked with what was available." "You worked with your own prejudices," Reeves said flatly. "Let me be clear, Colonel. Captain Torres has more combat experience than every officer on your staff combined. She's trained alongside and led special operations teams in the most hostile environments on Earth, and you gave her job to Lieutenant Morrison." Philip's jaw tightened. Lieutenant Morrison is a fine officer. Lieutenant Morrison, Reeves said, just spent the last week publicly insulting a superior officer whose boots he's not qualified to shine. Is that the kind of judgment you want leading your training program? The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Phillips looked around at the assembled officers, clearly realizing he was outmaneuvered but unwilling to back down completely. I stand by my decision, he said finally. Then you're a fool, Reeves said simply. He turned to Maya. Captain Torres, I have a proposition for you. My command is always looking for experienced operators to help train SEAL teams. We need someone who understands both combat realities and how to teach them. The position is at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. It's a promotion to major, and you'd be working with the best soldiers in the world. Maya felt her breath catch. Coronado, SEAL training, a position that would value her skills instead of hiding them. However, Reeves continued, the choice is yours. If you want to stay here and prove Colonel Phillips wrong, I'll support that too. I can make some calls, ensure the training position goes to you instead of Morrison. Phillips started to object, but Reeves silenced him with a look. Maya looked around the room. At Morrison, who couldn't meet her eyes. At Phillips, whose face was red with suppressed anger. At the other officers who had spent days treating her like she didn't belong. Then she looked at Major Chen, who gave her a slight nod of encouragement. She'd spent years proving herself in secret, in shadows, in places where her work could never be acknowledged. Maybe it was time to step into the light. Colonel Reeves, she said, I'd be honored to accept your offer. The news of Maya's new assignment spread through Fort Henderson like wildfire. Within hours, everyone knew who she really was, what she'd really done. The whispers in hallways stopped. The dismissive glances disappeared. In their place came something Maya had rarely experienced, genuine respect, mixed with more than a little embarrassment from those who'd underestimated her. But Maya had no interest in watching them squirm. She had 2 weeks to out-process from Fort Henderson and report to Coronado, and she intended to use every moment productively. On her second-to-last day at the base, she was clearing out her temporary office when Major Chen knocked on her door frame. "Got a minute, Captain?" he asked. "Of course, sir." Chen entered and closed the door behind him. "I wanted to thank you. What you did in that briefing room, calling yourself out like that, took guts. You could have just let it go, taken the easy route." Maya shook her head. "There was no easy route, sir. I was tired of being invisible." "You were never invisible to everyone," Chen said. "Some of us saw you." He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "This came through official channels this morning. Thought you'd want to see it." Maya took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a letter on Army letterhead. As she read, her eyes widened. It was from Lieutenant Morrison, requesting a transfer to a different base. The letter was professional but brief, citing personal reasons for the move. "He couldn't handle the shame," Chen said. "Facing you every day, knowing what he'd said, how he'd treated you. Some people can learn from their mistakes, others just run." "I didn't want to destroy his career," Maya said quietly. "You didn't. He did that himself. But maybe this will teach him something about humility." Chen paused. "Colonel Phillips, on the other hand, is staying. Though I hear he's getting a very thorough review from the division commander. Seems Colonel Reeves made some calls." Maya couldn't help but smile at that. "There's something else," Chen continued. "That joint exercise we ran, the one where you were on comms, the after-action report is being used as a case study now. Your tactical calls, the way you managed information flow, it's being incorporated into training protocols across multiple bases." "I was just doing my job, sir." "You were doing it better than anyone else could have." Chen extended his hand. "Good luck at Coronado, Captain, or should I say Major. The promotion papers came through this morning." Maya shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, sir, for everything, for seeing me when others didn't." Just promise me something, Chen said. When you're training those SEAL teams, teach them what you learned here. Teach them that the most dangerous enemy is the one you underestimate. Teach them to look past the surface and see the warrior underneath. I will, sir. After Chen left, Maya sat alone in her empty office for a while, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. The deployments she could never discuss. The missions that had no official record. The years of being Black Viper, a ghost in the system, doing the work that kept the country safe while receiving no recognition for it. She'd made peace with that anonymity once. She'd believed it was the price of the job. But now she realized that silence had cost her more than she'd acknowledged. It had cost her respect, opportunities, and the simple human dignity of being seen for who she truly was. That evening, Maya received a text from an unknown number. Heard you're joining us at Coronado. Welcome to the team. Chief Martinez, SEAL Team 3. Then another, looking forward to working with you, Major. We could use someone who knows what real combat looks like. LT, Chen, SEAL Team 7. And another, Black Viper, huh? You've got a legend to live up to. Lucky for us, you're the one who built it. See you soon. Commander Blake, Naval Special Warfare Group. Maya smiled, feeling something she hadn't felt in years, anticipation for the future instead of pride in the buried past. On her last morning at Fort Henderson, she went for a run around the parade grounds where she'd first watched the recruits training. The sun was just coming up, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. As she rounded the track, she saw a small group of female soldiers running in formation. They were young, maybe fresh out of basic training, their faces determined despite the early hour and the heat building even at dawn. One of them noticed Maya and called out to the others. They straightened their formation, running with extra precision as they passed her. One of the young women, she couldn't have been more than 20, met Maya's eyes and smiled. Maya nodded back, a simple gesture of acknowledgement, soldier to soldier, warrior to warrior. That afternoon, she loaded her few belongings into her car and took one last look at Fort Henderson's main gate. She thought about the woman who'd arrived here 2 weeks ago, angry and tired, and ready to fight for a position she'd never really wanted. That woman had been invisible, hidden behind classified files and unspoken achievements. But that woman was gone now. Maya Torres was done being invisible. Major Torres, soon to be training the most elite warriors in the world, was ready to be seen. As she drove through the gate and onto the highway heading west toward California, her phone buzzed with one final message. This one was from Colonel Reeves himself. The SEALs have a saying, the only easy day was yesterday. You've had a lot of hard days, Major Torres, but I think you're about to find that some of the best days are still ahead. See you in Coronado. We've been waiting for someone like you. Maya set the phone down and pressed the accelerator, the open road stretching before her like a promise. Behind her, Fort Henderson grew smaller in the rearview mirror. Ahead of her, the future waited, not in shadows or silence, but in the bright California sun where her skills would be valued, her experience honored, and her name finally spoken aloud.